there, Beer to Whiskey crew. Welcome to this episode of Beer to Whiskey. I'm Russ Heaps, and in my ongoing quest to spread the gospel of good taste today, I find myself in Dayton, Ohio. I'm at the Wing Brewing Company, and we're going to find out a little bit about their beers, a little bit about their history, a little bit about some of the people who are involved here. We are sitting in their tap room, but it's also their brewery floor. So there's a little bit of racket going on behind us. I just want to give you a little heads up on that. And by all means, please like us. Look for the Beer to Whiskey icon, click on that to subscribe, or click on subscribe below. And want to introduce to my immediate left here is my beer slurping co-conspirator, Randy Porter. Fraternity brother. We've been fraternity brothers, known each other for about 50 years, and Randy has had the misfortune of doing a couple of these with me, so you may recognize him. Sitting across from me, I have our special guest today. He is one of the partners, ownership partners in Warped Wing, and he's also the brewmaster, John Haggerty.
Hey guys.
John, thanks for the invite.
It's our pleasure. Happy to participate.
And I'm sitting here in a forest of beers, which has me stoked to no end. But before we get down to the talking about the beers, give me a little background on the brewery, how long it's been here, where the name originated, your partner, who your partner is, and so forth.
Sure. The brewery opened for business in 2014, so obviously there was some work in advance of that in getting the company organized and so forth. So originally there was four of us, myself, my partner Nick, who does sales and marketing for us, Joe Wiseman, who's now retired, and Mike Stover, who was sort of a part-time participant on a day-to-day work basis, as he's a partner in an accounting firm. So Mike's still an investor, but his presence at the brewery was always sort of limited anyways. So we now have our own financial team in-house, and Mike has time to go sail his boat or do whatever accountants do where they're not doing taxes. I have no idea. But it's a really great team. I really appreciate all the input that all of them have had to this point in our success. And so as we've gone along, obviously that management team is morphed a little bit. Nick and I are still here, and Joe and Mike have moved on to other projects. So we started, here in Dayton. I'm not from Dayton. The other three guys were from Dayton. They really wanted to open a brewery in Dayton proper. There was a lot of talk about whether we open downtown or whether we open up in the suburb. Dayton's an old Rust Belt city. It's had its glory days. It's also had some not so fantastic days, as we all know. But that also meant there were some opportunities for us when
Right.
we came in. And at the time, in 2013, 2014, there was no production brewery operating in Dayton, which is a metropolitan area of 1 million plus people, which at that time was unheard of. That you had a metro area of that magnitude.
Yeah, that
anybody
is.
serving it.
Yep.
So there was an opportunity for us there. Obviously, my partners, being from Dayton, were gung-ho about Dayton. I wasn't from Dayton, but as we started to look at it, my family and I, met those guys, took a look at the city, what the city had to offer us, what the state of Ohio had to offer us. It started to become a real quick no-brainer. And so we all came together and got this thing going and rolling. We just celebrated our 5th anniversary of opening the doors this past January. So I guess that means we're somewhat of a mature company. I don't know how
in this
Yeah.
business anyway.
Yeah.
Well, you certainly become an anchor for people to come downtown. I think the first thing that happened was the ballpark, and then slowly over time things have evolved, and you're obviously part of that anchor type of a business that will bring people downtown again.
Well, I'm glad that you think of us that way. We like to think that we have a role to play in the rejuvenation of downtown, but a lot of people do as well. We're not the only ones, obviously, but I do feel like we've contributed something. So thank you for recognizing that. So far so good. We're happy being in Dayton, and we're proud to be here. And in fact, that's been one of our sort of marketing principles, is sort of planting the flag in Dayton and saying, man, we think Dayton's cool. At the time that we opened and started doing that, there weren't a lot of people saying a lot of really good things about Dayton. And that's started to change, and it's been a hallmark of what we've been trying to tell people here in Dayton is that Dayton's cool, and you should be proud of being from Dayton. It's got a lot of really great history. It's got a lot of really great stuff going on right now.
You're in Dayton mostly originally just because the other guys wanted to be in Dayton.
But also there was a good opportunity here in Dayton. We weren't the first craft brewery to open in Dayton. There have been others, in the somewhat distant past that opened and didn't make it for whatever reason.
Right.
And there's a couple breweries that have opened in advance of us in the Dayton metro area. Downtown Toxic opened before we did, but they're a brew pub mostly. But I got to give Shane credit for that. Those guys were here first. And then of course there's Dayton Beer Company, but they were out in Kettering. So they've moved downtown subsequently. And there's been others since then. But it was a good time to come in. It's a good opportunity at the time we opened.
Where did Warped Wing come in?
So the name Warped Wing is derived from Dayton's most famous sons, Wilbur and Orville. The whole marketing plan is really built around a lot of referencing to hometown technologies and inventions and so forth. Dayton itself was this hub of innovation in its glory days. A lot of people say it was sort of its time's Silicon Valley. And so if you go back, you see all these things that were invented in Dayton that we take for granted today in our everyday life that were really revolutionary in their time. We like to pay homage to that kind of stuff, in the names of the beers, in the name of the company. The reference to the Wright brothers is through their wing design that they developed in order to control powered flight. Right, so it used to be that you could get the airplane up in the air and it would fly, but you couldn't steer it once you were up there.
Yeah, right.
How do you make it go the way you want it to go? And so they developed this technology called wing warping that allowed them to flex the wings of the airplane and thus steer it where they wanted it to go. So today they don't use that technology anymore. You use what's called an aileron to steer the plane. But back in the early days, you warped the wing. We took that terminology and we inverted it, called it Warped Wing.
We were talking a little bit before we started rolling cameras that you've got 25 years under your belt in brewing.
Yeah, I started professionally back in '93.
Had you been home brewing before that?
No.
Really? You just kind of right out of the chutes running?
Well, I came out of school with an architectural degree in '91 from a local school here, Miami University. And the building trades at that point in time were not doing all that hot. We were in a little bit of a recession.
Right.
Not as bad as it was in like '08, the late aughts, but not great. And of course, in any economic downturn, the first thing that goes are the building trades. So I had moved out to Seattle after I graduated from college with some buddies, just because, why not?
Yeah, right, exactly.
21 years old, 22 years old, and I'm going to go do something cool.
Redondo Beach, this guy here,
Yeah.
California.
So, while I was out there, I did a bunch of different odd jobs. I did some construction work. I did a lot of handyman stuff on people's houses that I got to know in Seattle area. But ultimately, I found that boring. Got a job working in the kitchen at this brew pub. And so I was making sandwiches and chili and doing these different things. The place was called the Big Time Brewery. It's still there, still runs. as I was working there, I started to think to myself, you know, gee, self, you know, you can spend your time working in this kitchen, or you could learn to do something cool like making beer, right? And so I started bugging the crap out of the guy that was the head brewer. His name was Ed Tringali. So Ed had been the original brewer there and was there for 5 or 6 years before he eventually left. And so while I was there every day, I'd be like, hey Ed, I want to work in the brewery, right? Next day, hey Ed, when are you gonna let me work in the brewery? Right, the day after that, hey Ed, I really want to work I mean, this went on, you know, for months.
Yeah.
Right? Because I just decided that's what I wanted to do without even really knowing what it entailed, right? Finally, because it was just Ed and a part-time assistant. So finally the guy that was the assistant decided he was leaving to go back to graduate school. So Ed gave me a shot working in the brewery. And I started doing that and I liked it. It appealed to me, you know. When I was in college, I did a lot of landscape work, so I was used to the physical labor. I liked having a tangible product
Right.
at the end of your workday that you could go out and share with people. And it also appealed to some of the creative part of me that said, hey, I get to invent this thing from scratch, from nothing to, you know,
Yep.
an end product. So, you know, all those things kind of played into a lot of the sensibilities I had about architecture and design as well. It all spoke to me, right? I really liked it. And, you know, at one point I was working for a couple breweries at the same time out in Seattle, and I was, you know, working the door at a bar, and all these things that you do when you're trying to get your feet set. You know, I'd have like 3 or 4 jobs sort of rolling at the same time. But it was a good time to get in, you know, because it's the, you know, early mid-90s.
Yep.
And, you know, craft beer was really starting to roll. And so when I came back from the West Coast to the Midwest, you know, that started to lead. That experience led to a lot of job offers to work at different breweries and run different breweries. After 8 or 9 years of doing it, I was like, okay, you know, who am I kidding? This is what I'm going to do. Right?
Yeah.
You kind of got to own it at that point. You know, I'm not going to be an architect. I'm going to be a brewer. And so then I saved my pennies and put myself through brewing school over at the VLB, which is a school in Berlin, Germany.
Oh, you were serious at that point. You did buy it. You did own it.
Yep. So I went through that program, you know, graduated, came back to the States, and ran a brewery in Michigan for a long time, and was the brewmaster and a partner in that company. They made me a partner in that company, which was great. Gave me a lot of exposure to the business side of running a brewery that I hadn't had previous to that. So that was a really great experience. And then ultimately left there and ended up, you know, starting this. I did a little consulting and some other things in between, but, you know, ultimately we, you know, came to this project and here we are.
How did you find your partners in this thing? Were you neighbors? Were you?
Well, my one partner, Joe, he's been in the beer industry either in retail sales or event management or distribution for 30, 35 years. And so Joe and I crossed paths a few times as beer judges at the GABF or World Beer Cup or whatever. And so I had known Joe, we were acquaintances through the industry. And so when this project came up, you know, he and Nick and Mike were already together as a team. And so they had sort of the finance and the sales and marketing aspect of the business sort of covered. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to open a brewery, but we don't know how to make beer. That's a problem, right?
Just a little.
So that's when you know, Joe reached out to me and he's like, hey, look, what do you think about coming on to the team? And you know, at that point, I was doing some consulting and I was working for an equipment company in their clientele by the name of Craftwork, which is out of Michigan. And I had some other opportunities to do some other stuff in the industry, go into allied trade or, you know. But at the end of the day, I wanted to make beer. I wasn't done making beer. I had ideas about some stuff I wanted to do, flavors I wanted to play around with that I hadn't yet been able to do. And so, like I said, the opportunity was too good. The team was strong. The location was good. I could see raising my family here in Dayton pretty easily. and it's close enough to my parents and our in-laws that you can get back and see Grandma and Grandpa. There wasn't like, you're moving to the other side of the world and you don't ever get to see those people. It was still within the same region, so it all dovetailed together really nicely.
Wow, that's a story and a half.
It's a little bit, yeah. That's my thumbnail sketch of my professional career. Yeah. I run into people a lot. There's a lot of guys, particularly like in the legal and banking and insurance professions. I find these corporate professions that think they want to be a brewer when they're done being those guys.
Yeah.
Right? And then they realize how much physical work it is, how little compensation there really is in it, and then they change their minds.
Right.
Right. It isn't what they think it is. So you kind of got to want to do it. It's got to be something that you want. And there's a lot of stuff that is involved in the brewery that's not fun. You're going to be hot and sweaty and worn out and wet and cold. You'll probably be sick a lot in the winter because of those temperature changes, and you run the risk of burning yourself either with steam or with chemicals. You're on your feet all day. Your feet hurt, your knees hurt, your hips hurt. You're usually covered in
totally glamorous.
Yeah,
That's what you're saying.
Right. But here's the thing. I mean, there's a litany of stuff that would make you go, well, I don't really want to do that, right? But there's one thing that makes you keep coming back, and that is when you clock out and you walk over to the bar and you get a pint of the beer that you made, and somebody at the bar says, hey man, great job, right? Boom. All that stuff goes away, and it's all worth it, right? That's what makes it worth it. Right?
Yep.
Or when you're at a party and at your friend's house and they're having a kegger and they got a keg of your beer and everybody's drinking it and they're like, man, this is awesome. And you're there, you're like, yeah, this is awesome, right? Because all that work you put in is paying off, right? That's the payoff. So that's what keeps you coming back. If that's enough for you, and it was for me, then you're good, right? You figure out a way, and if it's not, you don't.
You guys do a lot of distribution, correct?
We do a fair amount, yeah.
Okay. How many barrels a year are you guys pushing out of here?
Last year, I think we were around like 8,200 barrels.
Wow.
Our max capacity is about, 10.5, 11,000. It varies a little bit because each beer has a different production time associated with it. If we were making all IPA, we'd be up, double that roughly. But we don't. We do a lot of lager beer also. Lager beer takes longer, and so it shrinks our total capacity for the year.
Right.
So it depends a little bit on the product mix, but where we're at right now, it's about 10.5, 11,000 barrels max capacity.
Does that make you the alpha brewer in Dayton, or are there?
Well, I don't know if it makes me the alpha. It makes me the largest, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's not always best to be the largest. Like if you've got the largest waistline, that may not be the best thing going.
Port's can attest to that. He knows that.
But in terms of volume of beer put out, yes, that makes us the largest.
Where's your distribution? I know you're Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton. Do you go past that, or?
Yeah, we do those three. The spring, we signed up our first wholesale distributor. We'd been all self-distributed until this year, and we signed up some groups up in the Toledo area. So Toledo, Bowling Green, Findlay, that sort of northern I-75 corridor. We have some distribution partners up there now, and we started selling up there a couple of months ago. So that's been going really well, so we're excited about that. It's just a little further than we're able to service independent.
Yeah.
Do you have plans to open an additional brewery someplace else to expand your footprint at all?
Well, we're always looking at opportunities to do different things. And so there's constantly, a project or two that we're kicking around. But so far we haven't bitten on anything. It hasn't been the right deal yet. But sooner or later something will come up and we'll see. So the short answer to your question is no, not currently, but stay tuned. Right?
Wow, that sounded like a definite maybe to me. That would be my interpretation of that. What was that first craft beer that kind of really captured your imagination and your attention?
Well, before I got into beer as a profession, my friends and I that I moved out west with, we'd go to this little bar called the College Inn Pub. They used to have a nice, lineup of beers.
Right.
At the time, we thought it was exceptional. I'm sure the bar's still there. I don't know how people would feel about their lineup today, but 25 years ago,
Yeah,
it was
sure.
It was something. And there was a couple of beers in there that we used to drink. I'm trying to remember. Well, first of all, I remember drinking like Sierra Nevada Celebration Ale.
Yep.
That was a huge deal for us when it would come out every year, right? And of course, as time has gone by, that beer's gotten sort of less street cred to it. But you got to keep in mind, in 92, 93, that was a hop monster. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody made a beer like that, right?
Yep.
And so my friends and I, my other professional brewing peers and I, we would talk about that beer, as time would go by. It's like, well, are we the ones that have changed, or the beer the one that's changed?
Yeah.
And clearly, we're the ones that have changed, because when you drink it now, it doesn't seem as extreme as it did at the time. But at the time, it's like, oh my God, this is the Renaissance. You know
Yep.
what I mean? A couple of import beers like Scotch ales, wee heavies, and stuff like that we were into, that were coming over from the UK, that were poured there.
You got your formal training in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Does that influence the kind of beers you like to make?
I grew up in a time where craft beer didn't really exist, at least here in the Great Lakes.
Sure.
As I was sort of coming of age, craft beer was starting to happen on the coast. But that meant I was growing up drinking industrial lager beer. I mean, that's what our dads had in their basements.
Yeah.
That's what we would steal from them.
Yep.
And that's, when you had a fake ID, that's what you'd go buy from the
Yeah.
store, because that's what you knew. So I've always had a soft spot in my heart for, that kind of beer, that lighter lager beer. Now, as a craft brewer, that wasn't really something that people wanted from us. So we didn't spend a lot of time making that through most of my career. Now, we make something similar to that now, which is what you're drinking in the Troutwood. But, times change. And,
Yeah.
people want different things. I always liked that. So when I was in Germany studying beer, and this is true really at any brewing school, they're going to teach beer from the perspective of making a Pilsner sort of beer. That's the base beer, because that's the biggest selling style of beer on the planet.
Right.
So everything's taught from that perspective. And then you have to go figure out, well, how to manipulate that theory to make all these other beers that you want to make, right? You think about like an artist, right? That guy goes to school and learns how to paint a classical portrait. And that's what the professors are going to make him do. Learn how to do the classic, right? And now that you know how to do that, you know how all the tools work and all the theory behind how color interaction in space and so forth work. Now you can go break all the rules you want and come up with something new and reinvent the whole thing,
Yep.
right? It's sort of the same notion in beer, whether you go to school in Germany or Belgium or England or here in the States or wherever it is. They're sort of teaching you from that same theory. Here's the core science behind what you're doing. Let's get it down cold and then manipulate it to your advantage. So yeah, I mean, I like to make lager beer because of that European influence and because of the time period in which I grew up. But I also like to make all the other stuff. What I really find that I do as a beer drinker is I move all over the map. Right. One day I might have a lager beer, or 1 hour I might have a lager beer. Next hour I might have an IPA. Then I might have a barrel-aged beer. Then I might have a stout. Then I might have a Belgian beer. Then it's just like I'm moving around constantly. What do I feel like?
You guys make a variety of beers here, and we're going to get into that in a second. But how many beers in the tap room do you normally have on tap?
We normally have something around 15, I'd say on average, 15, 16. I want to say we got 20 faucets over there. We just got our A1A license, which is an Ohio thing. It allows us to pour guest beer and serve wine and so forth. So right now we have a guest beer on from our friends from Dayton Beer Company. Their anniversary is this weekend. So we did a collab with them. We're pouring that right now. We also have one faucet that's dedicated to pouring cider. because we have a number of people that come into the brewery that are gluten intolerant,
Yeah.
or they don't like beer, but their friends like beer, and so we need to be able to offer them something.
Yep.
So, you know, it used to be that we would have 20, that wasn't uncommon, but now we'll max out at like 18 of our own beers. I want to say today we have 16.
You guys have a pretty big barrel aging program going on here.
Yep.
How much stuff do you have in the wood at any given time?
No one's asked me that question, so I don't have the answer readily available off the tip of my tongue, but we have somewhere around like 250 or 260 barrels
Wow.
between whiskey and wine and so forth right now. And that goes up and down. It depends. You know, we have a couple of big brands. Whiskey Rebellion, which is one that we'll taste here in a minute, is a bigger barrel-aged release for us. And so we'll typically, like right now, I think we have somewhere around 90 barrels of that. That's going to all rack at the same time.
Yeah.
Come this fall. So if you were sitting here, say the end of November, beginning of December, then I'd be down that many barrels because we wouldn't have replaced them yet.
Yeah.
Right. So it varies a little bit when you walk in the door, but typically a couple hundred would be a good number.
That's pretty substantial.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what we have in front of us here. You mentioned this one,
Yep, that's the Trotwood.
which is a good crushable beer.
Yep,
What, maybe?
about 4% alcohol.
Yeah, wow, that is crushable.
I want to say it's 120 calories, 110 calories, something like that. So we don't advertise it as a low-cal beer or anything of that nature, or light beer, but it's close to what the big brewers, you know, net out for their calorie counts. All malt. We use German noble hops in it real lightly, so 10 IBUs.
Yeah.
Just enough to provide a little balance to the beer. You know, like they used to say, it's the beer to have when you're having more than one, right? So.
All right. Onward and upward.
I might
Okay.
suggest that we go here to the Saison next.
All right.
This is we call it a farmhouse pale ale. It's a Saison. We age it in a Sauternes barrel. In this iteration, we've done it in Chardonnay barrels as well in the past. Sauternes is a dessert wine, so it's a little bit sweeter.
You definitely get the sweetness on the palate. You
Yeah.
really do.
We use a blend of 3 different Saison yeast strains in this. Saison yeast strains, you know, they're a little finicky. Some have a hard time starting, some have a hard time finishing, some like to take their time through the middle, and they all kind of contribute different flavors. So we figured, well, we're gonna fix that. And so we put a particular blend of 3 different strains together to try to highlight their strengths. So we run the fermentation, then we use a North American grown hop called Denali in this hop. This gives it a little earthiness and a little fruitiness at the same time. So we've been happy with the results that we've gotten with this beer. Play around with it, you know, what barrels are available. Like I said, we've done Chardonnay in the past. This year, the iteration was Sauternes. We make a non-barrel aged version of Saison Farmhouse Pale Ale as our spring seasonal called Liquid Picnic. And it's lower alcohol, it's about 4.5%. And I like it because A, it's light, and like the Trotwood, you can drink a few of
Right.
them. But B, you know, the Saison yeast kicks off a lot of flavor into the beer. It's a very yeast dependent beer. And so it gives you a depth of character that you don't normally get out of a lighter beer style. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. It challenges you a little bit. You know, a little bit of hay, straw, you know, that sort of barnyard flavor. Sometimes you get a little black pepper note out of it. So it's fun. And then they tend to be quite dry too, if they're not barrel aged. So this particular barrel sort of juxtaposes that finish because the wine is a little bit sweeter. So it kind of picks up the dryness on the finish of a Saison that you would normally find.
I like this.
Yeah, I think it's quite drinkable. Now this one, barrel aged version is a little bit bigger. I'm doing this from memory. I want to say that's about 6.5 or 7%.
It doesn't drink like
no,
that.
No, it does not. It's very smooth, and as you say, you do pick up some of that earthiness to it as
But
well.
it's not boozy at all.
No.
In any beer, regardless of how strong or light the alcohol content is, right? The perception of the alcohol in the beer is really goes back to how healthy your yeast is, and did you pitch enough yeast? Did you oxygenate it enough so that it's coming out of the gate firing? You know, if you can get the yeast to make a really clean ethanol, then it's going to be sweet and smooth. You're not going to notice the alcohol in the beer. But if the yeast is stressed out, then you start to make a lot of higher aliphatic alcohols, and those are the ones that kind of burn. And so you'll see that a lot in higher gravity beers.
Yeah.
Because the yeast maintenance was a little bit off, viability wasn't quite there, or the viable cells anyways weren't at the cell count that you really needed for that beer. And so it stressed the yeast, and it made those higher alcohol compounds, which are the things that give you the wicked hangover, right?
What next?
This is the Gamma Bomb, which is our standard IPA. North American two-row malt. We use Bravo hops as a bittering hop for this beer, and then we do a blend of Centennial, Cascade, and Amarillo, so 3 sort of classic West Coast IPA hops that we blend into the body and the dry hop on the beer. Get that nice big hop aroma, a lot of hop flavor, really a sort of bitterness, sort of classic IPA.
This is your other big seller, correct?
Yeah, so the Trotwood and the Gamma Bomb are the 2 biggest sellers. Like I was telling you earlier, they can kind of take turns. Depends on the year and, you know, what's sort of the hip thing.
Yeah.
IPAs right now for us is on a tear. So it's been our big seller this year. Last year, Trotwood was the big seller. So it just depends on what people are going for.
Did you give us the ABV on this?
7.2.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not, IPAs aren't my,
It's not your bag.
that's not my go-to
Yeah.
thing when I sit down, but this is a pretty good one.
No, this is excellent. I like IPAs, and this is excellent. It really
Yeah,
is.
thank you.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's,
I don't drink IPA a lot anymore because they tend to be 6.5% to 8%,
Yeah.
which is a 50-year-old man. It's painful.
well, the one thing I noticed about a lot of IPAs, maybe it was just because I wasn't experienced with them, but they tended to be almost like drinking perfume.
Yeah, they can be if the hop's too intense.
This does
Yeah.
not have that perfumey,
Yeah.
that note to the nose or to the palate.
Yeah.
And it's got kind of a dry finish.
Yes.
It's,
Yeah. Historically, IPA was derived from the Burton upon Trent area of the UK, right? And so it's really renowned for its water quality, which is high in sulfate, right? And that sulfate helps to dry the finish of the beer out. And so, you know, you got to look at your water that you're using to make beer and then determine, well, do I need to add some water salts or not? And so for this beer, we add some calcium sulfate, and we mash really low too to accentuate the finish of the beer. We
Yeah.
want it to dry out. We want you to perceive that sort of dryness in the back end of the beer because it's going to accentuate your perception of the hop bitterness, right? The drier that beer is, the more you're going to feel it. We're not being shy here. This beer is about hops and about bitterness, right?
yeah.
That's what IPA should be about.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
people are making New England IPAs, and that's great. You know, they're both IPAs, but they're really not related to each other. They're really, it's sort of it's unfortunate set of circumstances they share those 3 letters because the beers really aren't the same.
Right. Which of these darker barrel aged?
I'd probably go with the Whiskey Rebellion next, which is the one closest to you. So this is our big barrel age release that we do every year, sort of late November, early December. We use Woodford Reserve barrels primarily for this beer. It's an imperial stout, so it's 11 point whatever percent alcohol. We'll age it on the wood for about a year. So this particular iteration came out this past December. So we'll hold a certain amount back in the library so we can rotate some of this stuff up periodically over the course of the year. So we happen to have a few barrel-aged beers on tap right now.
Wow.
This is outstanding.
That's magnificent.
It really is.
That is
It just
This is my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
you get the chocolate, the coffee, Yeah, it's just,
And you get the subtleness of the bourbon, of the whiskey in it. It is really nice. Wow.
you say this was barreled for a year?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And so we'll do things for the day of the event. You know, we have a big release of this, you know, standard iteration of this beer. But then, you know, because the beer market is what it is, we also do a couple of variations. Last couple of years, we've made this beer with, you know, peach and caramel and vanilla as well. I think we'll have a new variant in addition to that one this year. Then the other thing we've been doing is I've been holding barrels back. So we have, say, 90 barrels of this that we're sitting on right now for 2019 release. But we'll go through and we'll sample different barrels. We'll try to pick out the, you know, 2 that we think are exceptional, and we'll put them aside and we'll let them continue to age. And we've been doing that now for a number of years. And so last year we also released a 4-year aged version of this beer, right?
4? Wow.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, you know, just like with making whiskey or bourbon or whatever, you know, the angels are pretty greedy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
They
Yep.
like to take a fair amount of that liquid out of the barrel. By the time you're done aging it for, you know, 3 or 4 years and
How
half
much?
full.
So you
roughly.
lose 50%.
Yeah, roughly half full. I mean, you're going to lose probably just over the course of a year, you're probably going to lose 10%
Okay.
on that first year, plus or minus.
In this age of boutique distilleries, there are a lot of bourbons out there that aren't aged 4 years in a barrel.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. We're not doing a lot. I mean, we'll, you know, a couple of barrels every
Yeah.
year. We'll sort of push off into the corner.
And then this is the esters?
Yeah, and so then every year we also do a collaboration with a local chocolate company called Esther Price. We'll make a beer with chocolate or some other component of the candy making process in it. So this past year was the 5th anniversary of doing that, and so we made a barrel-aged version of a chocolate cherry imperial stout.
Yeah, I get the cherry
I
on
got
the nose.
the cherry right away.
Yeah, right on the nose.
So we're using some Luxardo cherries in there, the chocolate, and then we aged it on bourbon barrels, and again, I believe they were Woodford Reserve.
Yeah, Esther Price, Russ, was a lady who started a little candy business, I think, in her garage back in pre-Depression era, and it's grown into a huge business here in Dayton. She has her candy shipped all over the world.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they're really big in Dayton and Cincinnati.
How did you make that happen?
Well, my partner Nick grew up here in Dayton, and so he was friends with the grandsons of the president of the company, and his son-in-law Doug Dressman is their father. Doug and I have been working together a lot on the beer, and he's a real mechanical engineering sort of mind, and so a couple times a year I'll find myself in the plant with Doug, and we're going through like, oh, here's what we're doing with this machine, here's how we're going to set up this process, which appeals to me because it's the same sort of stuff we're doing in the brewery.
Yeah.
And of course, while you're walking around in the plant, he's like, here, you want to try some? Like, yeah, it's like you're Willy Wonka or something, right? So they're just like throwing candy at you.
You got the golden ticket.
Yeah, while you're going through the plant. The beer's called Esther's Little Secret, right? And so the secret is that every year it's a different beer, and nobody knows what it is until we release it, right?
I see. Okay.
So last year, the beer was, imperial stout with chocolates and cherries in it. Because it was the 5th year, we also took some of it and we aged it in barrels, right? So we sort of had this dual release. So that went over really well. So we might continue to do, some barrel releases in conjunction with the standard beer every year.
Yep.
But every year it's different, right? So next year's beer won't be this one. It'll be something else, and I can't tell you what it is because, I'd have to kill you. And if I didn't, then my partner Nick
Go ahead
would
and
kill
ask
me. Yeah. So.
Go ahead and ask them.
But we've done stuff like we've done a Scotch ale with caramel. We did a peanut butter brittle porter.
Oh my God.
We did a white chocolate, white beer, and then of course we did this one.
If you're not doing this kind of thing, what the hell's the point? You know what I'm
Well,
saying? This is,
Yeah, I mean, there's yes and no. I also find a lot of value in making the Trotwood and the Gamma Bomb, and I know that feels a little bit like, you know, the old donut commercial. You got to get up. It's time to make the donuts. But there's also sort of a zen sort of satisfaction in being able to do that, being able to do it consistently.
Well, absolutely, to be able to,
you know,
to make a beer like this that comes out consistent all the time. That's a,
I
you know,
agree.
lager
There's
is not an easy
there's
thing
a
to do,
certain
so-
degree of
Right.
pride in that, a certain
Yeah.
but this is chemistry and paint by the numbers.
a little bit, yeah.
This is Picasso. This is
I don't know about that, but thank
no, but
you.
it's no,
Yeah.
but it is. I mean, that's where the creativity and the art and the
Yeah,
this is
right.
to make this well is technical.
Yes.
To make this well is art, is creative art, in my opinion. This and even the saison is making those crazy
Yeah.
things
Well,
that don't really go
yeah,
together.
I mean, to some degree, yes. You know, so when we start to make beers like these three, you know, we start from a different point
Right.
in terms of thinking about them. Like on these, we start at the end, and it's like, okay, I want it to be this alcohol content. You know, I want to use these hops, I want to use this malt, and you know, this is what we're going to do, and da 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 da. But with these beers, we start more with what's the flavor profile that we want on the beer, and how do we want these flavors to interact with each other, and in what level of intensity do they need to be in order to counterbalance each other and work together. And then once we sort of have that mapped out, then we start to lay in the hops and the malt and the process behind it. So we kind of go the opposite direction.
Yeah.
You know, when we make.
What's the ABV of this? Did you give that to
It's
us?
I didn't, but it's 11 and a half.
Okay.
It's up there.
Yeah, it's got. Although again, you just know that it's a big alcohol content, but it's not because it's boozy at all.
No.
It's really smooth. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today, and again, thanks for the invite. It's been enlightening. It's been fun. The beer is terrific.
The beer's
Thank you.
been outstanding. I would, you know, just make one shout out to the people out there watching these videos. Come to Dayton, Ohio. Make sure you make a trip to Warped Wing. They have some of the best beers I've ever tasted. Plus, there is a beer passport tour when they get to Dayton.
Yeah, there's about 15 or 16 breweries here in town.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and you can go to the Aviation Museum, birthplace of, you know, the home of the Wright brothers. So, come to Dayton, come to Warped Wing. You will not be disappointed.
And on top of that, a half an hour from here is Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio, where we graduated, and that's worth going up and looking at. Yeah, not really. But with that, John,
Russ, thank you.
thanks a lot.
Yep.
It was fun.
Thank
It was
you.
fun.
Appreciate it.
See you next time. And there you have it, crew. Beer to whiskey. If you like what you saw, click on the thumbs up below, and please subscribe. Little round Beer to Whiskey icon down in the corner. And new video comes out every Thursday at noon East Coast time. And if we have our members only section up and running, check into that and you'll see some good stuff that you only see if you're a member. So until next time, cheers.